I've always struggled with finding time to manage my finances. At the end of a busy week, the last thing I want to do is spend time budgeting all of my expenses or tracking down customer service teams to cancel old subscriptions I no longer use. But now I use Rocket Money, and it does all that for me. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Stop wasting money on the things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/Washington Post. That's rocketmoney.com/Washington Post.
Well, good morning, Aaron.
Good morning. How are you?
So, Aaron, we're talking Thursday morning, but last night I was on the floor of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, standing next to the Minnesota delegation as we were waiting for Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to come out. And they were just really pumped.
They have these giant cardboard cutouts of his head, and they call them Walz heads. And they've told everyone to not wave them yet. They're going to wait until the moment that Tim Walz takes the stage. And I'm pretty sure this is going to be the most lit, most ecstatic spot of the convention. Because these folks from Minnesota weren't expecting this moment to happen. I mean, no one was a few weeks ago even.
This was not the convention that any Democrat was really expecting just a month ago before Joe Biden dropped out. But that's not true for anyone like it is for Democrats in Minnesota.
All right, this is the moment. The signs, the Coach Walz signs are...
Yeah, my favorite part of that first clip that we played was, I don't know who it was, but it sounded like it might be a member of my family from northern Minnesota shouting, "Oh, wow." Like there it is right there. Like, folks, that sound can only exist, I think, in northern Minnesota.
Well, welcome to the Campaign Moment from the Washington Post, your guide to the biggest developments in the 2024 election. I'm Elahe Izadi.
And I'm Aaron Blake, senior political reporter here at the Post and writer of the Campaign Moment newsletter.
It's Thursday, August 22nd, and this is day 4 of the Democratic National Convention. We've been here on the ground in Chicago all week, bringing you all the political news and analysis you need to know. Tonight, of course, will be the night Vice President Kamala Harris takes the stage, but today we're going to focus on the headlining speech from Walz from Wednesday night when he formally accepted the Democratic nomination for vice president. And we'll also dig into some other big takeaways from night 3 of the DNC. So, Aaron, before we get into what Tim Walz said, I want to ask you, what do you think he needed to accomplish with this speech?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big moment for him, obviously. You know, he has been out on the trail with Harris before the convention. This wasn't like with the Republicans where we found out on the first day of the convention who the vice presidential nominee would be. So people have gotten somewhat introduced to Tim Walz before, but not with the kind of eyeballs that you see at a convention. And I think the traditional role of a vice presidential nominee is you're the cheerleader for the ticket and you're the attack dog for the opponent. And I think Walz has really embodied that. And I think that's a big focus in his speech on Wednesday night. He really kind of crystallized the message of the entire night in a way that, you know, was maybe a little less high-minded than we might see from Kamala Harris on Thursday night, but certainly reflected kind of his role in the campaign.
So, yeah, let's talk about what he said and speaking about the themes and kind of crystallizing it, as you were saying. So what were some of the moments that really stood out to you as you were watching his speech last night?
I think the theme, the overriding theme, not just of his speech, but of the night earlier was freedom. You know, Democrats for a lot of years have kind of ceded the ground of patriotism and waving the American flag and things like that. And we've seen a real effort this week to try and reclaim that mantle. And so we saw, you know, Josh Shapiro, the Pennsylvania governor, talking about freedom.
You know what, Democrats? We are the party of real freedom. That's right.
We saw Oprah Winfrey talking about freedom.
The women and men who are battling to keep us from going back to a time of desperation and shame and stone cold fear, they are the new freedom fighters. And make no
They
mistake,
debuted a new ad about freedom, and then Walz comes on and kind of talks through what this vision of freedom and the contrast of freedom is to the Harris-Walz ticket.
Because this is a big part about what this election is about. Freedom. When Republicans use the word freedom, they mean that the government should be free to invade your doctor's office. Corporations, free to pollute your air and water. And banks, free to take advantage of customers. But when we Democrats talk about freedom, we mean the freedom to make a better life for yourself and the people that you love.
And so he talked about the idea that Republicans are, not just weird, but they're infringing on your freedoms by kind of selling out to big business.
Which, Aaron, this feels like a flipping of the script, because isn't that word the word that has been the watchword for Republicans for so long? Like, Democrats are infringing on your freedom.
Yeah, it's a really interesting attempt to kind of hijack that mantle. Democrats think that they have an in on this because of reproductive rights, but they've really expanded this to be talking about other issues. The idea that you should have the freedom to get health care under Obamacare, protecting Social Security and Medicare. They kind of set up a contrast where the Democratic Party is the party of freedom, and not just freedom, but a kind of a specific, pretty populist version of freedom where the government is protecting you against the big interests, and Republicans are selling out to those big interests.
Do you feel like Tim Walz, what were some of the things that he said that kind of crystallized that? Do you think he was an effective messenger of that approach of using that word freedom and co-opting it in the Democratic sense?
Yeah, I think he is. I think that people have kind of misunderstood Tim Walz's appeal a little bit. There was a lot of talk after he was picked as the running mate about whether the Harris campaign kind of made a blunder by picking someone who was too progressive. I think that there is a proud tradition in the Midwest, especially of candidates who maybe kind of hew to more left-leaning policies, but speak the language of populism and the middle class. And he kind of shoehorned that into this message of freedom that Democrats have been so keen on injecting into this convention and trying to make their mantra.
The other thing that struck me in what you're saying, Aaron, is how he was using his sort of personal biography as a way to discuss some of these things, like what you're saying of, we're going to filter this through the lens of being in the Midwest. And there was a moment where he said, we have a golden rule.
We've got a golden rule. Mind your own damn business.
Mind your own damn business, which is like a big moment for the Minnesota delegation. But then also he talked a lot about being a coach, a football coach.
It's the fourth quarter. We're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we've got the ball. We're driving down the field.
When this was happening on the floor, I turned to a delegate and told him I didn't get the metaphor.
I don't understand the football stuff, I gotta be honest.
Yeah, me neither. I was in pep band.
It's, I think it's easy to kind of caricature the focus on the football because it's everywhere and they're like really playing it up. It's all kind of corny a little bit, but I think it kind of feeds into the thing that he was picked for, which is an everyman appeal, kind of an attention to the local community. And it's not just the football. It's, of course, being a teacher. It's the story that one of his students spoke about.
There was a kid in the high school who couldn't afford to pay for lunch, and he ran up a lot of debt. And Tim and Gwen decided they'd help pay it off. They started calling around the district to see if there were any positions they could fill to make a little extra money. And that's how he wound up coaching us 7th graders.
And then I think one moment that really, really drove this home and that people are going to be talking about a lot and already are is when Walz was introduced and we saw his son, Gus Walz, who has a nonverbal learning disorder, ADHD, and an anxiety disorder, start crying and stand up and point to the stage and say, "That's my dad."
Hope, Gus, and Gwen, you are my entire world, and I love you.
I think that the Democrats did a very effective job of painting this guy as somebody who has faced the challenges that many normal Americans do and has stepped up to the plate when it comes to helping other people through those challenges. And I think that's what they were really going for with this pick. It wasn't necessarily about supporting specific policies and more of kind of creating this aura of attention to everyday Americans' concerns on the Democratic ticket.
Well, we're going to take a pause here, but after the break, we'll get more into what the delegates have been feeling about Walz and the Republican attacks against him.
I've always struggled with finding time to manage my finances. At the end of a busy week, the last thing I want to do is spend time budgeting all of my expenses or tracking down customer service teams to cancel old subscriptions I no longer use. But now I use Rocket Money, and it does all that for me. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Stop wasting money on the things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/Washington Post. That's rocketmoney.com/Washington Post.
While some streaming companies keep raising their prices,
the iHeartRadio app is still free.
And free never sounded so good.
Thousands of radio stations from all over the country playing your favorite music.
500,000 podcasts.
Thousands of playlists for every mood.
Over 100 commercial-free music channels.
And over 100 million songs to fill your favorite playlist.
Download the always free iHeartRadio app and start listening now.
iHeartRadio.
So, Aaron, as I was saying, I spoke with a lot of delegates on the convention floor on Wednesday, and I was asking them about Tim Walz. Earlier in the night before the speeches started, I spoke with Pat Pular, a delegate from Georgia.
He's really a person that we have never really seen so animated and so positive in his message and what he says and how it resonates with us. It's like, your favorite uncle. That's what it reminds me of.
Did you know who
And the theme of the night was just, we're all so excited about Tim Walz. And every single delegate, whether they've known him for years or just found out who he was a month ago, brought up that they loved how he was a former teacher and coach and he seemed down to earth. But I also wanted to understand whether delegates were worried at all about some of the Republican attacks that they've been trying out against Walz. They've been hitting him on how he's described his military service record and whether he's misled about his family's fertility treatments and connecting them to IVF. So during the speeches, I asked one delegate from St. Paul, Minnesota, Alfred Walkingbull, about some of those Republican attacks.
What do you guys make of Republican attacks on Tim Walz about his record of being a veteran and also the whole controversy around IVF and the other attacks they've made that saying he's too progressive for the country?
I mean, they live in an alternate reality, really, and so it doesn't really register for me. We know Tim. We've known him for as long as I've lived in Minnesota, and he's been solid on all of his. He stands on his record. He stands on his service record. He stands on his legislative record. The thing that I love about him is that he includes. He doesn't exclude. He's, and that's how he builds a strong state. So Minnesota weathered so many things under his terms as governor, and it's because he builds strong teams. He really is a coach.
So at least the Democrats here, the party faithful, they don't seem worried at all about him. Aaron, what do you make of that? Do you think some of these attacks or others will stick?
Yeah, it's an open question. I think it's important to note that these are real issues. Republicans have gone after Walz for saying that he was a retired command sergeant major when, in fact, he did serve in that role, but he did not retire in that role. He didn't fulfill the necessary obligations to retire in that rank. Walz's campaign has said that he used IVF, and Walz himself has lumped in IVF with the method that they did use, which is actually IUI. These are real things that, for whatever reason, hasn't stuck so far. Tim Walz has been a popular running mate. There was a AP NORC poll that showed him 11 points above water, so double digits percentage more people liked him than disliked him. That's a really strong contrast to J.D. Vance, who is very much in the other direction, a pretty historically unpopular running mate. I think it's worth kind of asking, if these things just haven't penetrated yet, if people just don't care about them. I think there's something to be said for the fact that, our politics in recent years, especially Donald Trump, have devolved into tens of thousands of false and misleading claims. And maybe people just kind of think some of this stuff is a little bit baked in and they've tuned it out. We've also had Republican members of Congress who signed a letter on Wednesday hitting Walz for mischaracterizing his military service, allegedly. And two of them have very legitimately been accused of doing the same thing. One of them actually signed a letter with, the Republicans have not, they're kind of casting stones from a glass house in certain ways because of the Trump years and because of some of these other things. And it just hasn't really taken so far. I've actually been a little bit surprised that Walz's popularity hasn't suffered from this. And I think it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, which is that it's not necessarily about the policies. Some of it is about kind of how he projects and the everyman appeal and things like that. And he's been successful with that so far.
Yeah. Aaron, looking beyond Walz, did anything else stand out to you from the speeches last night, the third night from the Democratic National Convention? Any other moments worth highlighting here?
Yeah, it was a big night. There was a lot of high-profile speakers. I was surprised by Nancy Pelosi's speech and how short it was. She's someone who looms over this convention as having helped nudge President Joe Biden aside, as we talked about on the podcast on Wednesday. Another thing that I thought was really interesting was the amount of attention that was paid to border security. We had more than half a dozen speakers talking about this issue last night. And I think there was a question about whether Democrats would just kind of punt on this issue and not talk about it. And in fact, they had speakers go up there and kind of pitch Kamala Harris as being the serious one on border security, for having supported that bipartisan border security bill that Trump wound up torpedoing, and pointing to the things that she did as a prosecutor to combat border crossings and crime that results from that. So I thought it was really an interesting attempt to flip the script. Democrats are not just trying to flip the script on freedom and patriotism, but they're also trying to flip the script on immigration. And then one last thing that I think really struck me was the speech that was given by the two parents of a hostage that's being held by Hamas. This is John Poland and his wife, Rachel Goldberg Poland. Their son, Hirsch Goldberg Poland, is being held by Hamas. And it was a very kind of unifying message that they focused on how, the people being held are from all different nationalities and all different religions, painting this as not a contest of who's suffering more, the hostages or the people of Gaza. They mentioned at one point, the idea that we need to bring home the hostages and we need to have a ceasefire.
We've met with President Biden and Vice President Harris numerous times at the White House. They're both working tirelessly for a hostage and ceasefire deal that will bring our precious children, mothers, fathers, spouses, grandparents, and grandchildren home, and will stop the despair in Gaza.
And I thought it was really interesting that Ilhan Omar, who's a very Palestinian cause-aligned House member from Minnesota, stood and applauded this. So this is a really dicey issue for Democrats, and they've kind of treated it pretty gently over the course of the week as we've seen these protests outside the convention. But they chose a message that I think was kind of bound to bring people together, at least for the moment. And they kind of checked the box of talking about this issue that's very difficult for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also notable because there was no Palestinian American who spoke last night. And I know that there was some conversation around allowing one of the uncommitted delegates who represent that movement of calling for a ceasefire, calling for an embargo on aid to Israel. That didn't happen. So, Aaron, we have one more day of the convention. What will you be looking for tonight on this last evening?
Well, it's a big moment for Kamala Harris. She'll, of course, be formally accepting the nomination and giving her big speech, the biggest of her career. Like Tim Walz, she's given speeches before, but this is on a whole new level. I'll be interested to see how much her speech is focused on her own vision, which she's been kind of criticized for not enunciating too much, versus going after the opposition. We've seen a lot of going after the opposition during this convention, and sometimes the nominee can then step forward and kind of give their own version of things. So I think the content of her speech is going to be very interesting on Thursday night, and certainly a lot of people will be paying attention to it.
Yeah. And as far as Tim Walz goes, there's a debate scheduled between him and J.D. Vance on October 1st. So that's another point to put in your calendar, right?
I'm really looking forward to this debate. I think that the contrast between the two vice presidential nominees is something that we haven't seen for a long time. And I think that there's a genuine kind of distaste for each other at this point. So I think it could be a little bit more high profile than your normal vice presidential debate.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. That's it for today's episode. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you. And if you want more original, deep analysis of the 2024 campaign, make sure you're subscribing to my newsletter, also called The Campaign Moment. You can find a link in our show notes and at WashingtonPost.com.
And if you don't already, make sure you subscribe to the Campaign Moment podcast feed. For more great episodes like this one, you can find us wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the show, tell a friend you think who would like it and give us a rating and review. Today's episode was produced by Peter Bresnan and mixed by Sam Baer. It was edited by Rena Flores and Mary Jo Murphy. I'm Elahe Izadi. Aaron Blake is a senior political reporter.
And we'll be back in your feed on Friday with more from the final night of the Democratic National Convention.
See ya, Aaron.
See ya.